From the campus of the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, the Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the 3rd Congressional District Republican Primary Candidate Debate.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's debate with the Republican primary candidates running for Utah's 3rd Congressional District. I'm Thomas Wright. It's my pleasure to moderate tonight's discussion, sponsored by the Utah Debate Commission, an organization dedicated to educating voters and encouraging the civil exchange of ideas. The candidates tonight are J.R. Bird, John Dougall, Mike Kennedy, Case Lawrence, and Stewart Peay. If you're watching or listening live, you are welcome to send your reactions and questions on social media to the hashtag UTDebates. The format for this debate is as follows. Each candidate will have a predetermined time to respond to the questions, and on occasion there will be a rebuttal time. A random drawing held prior to the debate determined that candidate Dougall will get the initial response to the first question. We'll then alternate turns on the remaining questions throughout the debate. Okay, candidates, let's debate. John, you've been the state auditor and are known as Frugal Dougall, so we're going to start with the national debt. The national debt right now sits at $33.15 trillion and is growing every day. Both parties are to blame. Both parties promise every year that they're going to do something about it. Utah has a balanced budget amendment and leads the nation by example. If you're elected, what are you going to say to the Speaker on your opening day, and what can you do specifically to cut the budget to eliminate deficit spending and eliminate our greatest national security threat, which is the national debt?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. Clearly, the national debt is one of the greatest security threats we have facing our nation. It is ballooning out of control, as was mentioned. One of the problems, I think, is most people do not understand numbers. They're afraid of numbers. They do not understand budgets. That includes congressmen and women. They do not understand the dire circumstance we're in. And I will tell the Speaker that my top priority is helping folks understand the problems with the out-of-control spending and how we need to rein that in. Right now, we're overspending by about 30%. And that debt is ballooning. It's going to drive higher taxes, higher inflation, and it's going to push out investment. And that all is going to cripple the economy. Helping folks understand we can't just cut waste and fraud. We have to dive in. Congress has 2 key responsibilities, budgeting and oversight. It's failing at both because they're hard. Budgeting and oversight is what I've done for decades.
Thank you. Candidate Kennedy.
Growing up in poverty, I recognized early on that if I didn't control money, money would control me. And it's frankly ridiculous to watch our federal legislators put on the credit cards of our grandchildren the debts of the distant future. And I'm deeply invested in making sure that we stop that ridiculous process. These omnibus bills that nobody even has a chance to read, I will vote no on every omnibus bill that comes to me that I don't even get a chance to read. These are 1,000-page bills and people are given less than 3 hours to read them. The answer is no when that happens. In addition to that, as a doctor, I've lived within Medicare and Medicaid, 2 are the primary drivers of our national debt as a professional for 25 years. I know where the fraud, waste, and abuse are in those systems, and I know also that we can preserve the high-quality care that we've all come to expect from those programs, and at the same time, get rid of ancillary spending that does not improve the health of people. And I'd love to roll up my sleeves and actually work on that vital national interest.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, you're next.
My background and experience has prepared me uniquely to lead on the issue of the deficit in our budget. I'm a businessman who's built a global company with over 5,000 employees right here in Utah. I understand how our economy works. I know how to create jobs. I know how to balance budgets and make organizations run efficiently. It is important. Our country is at a crossroads. It's important to send serious people back to Washington, D.C. who will lead and stand and fight for the American dream. And that starts first and foremost with our budget. I will push for regular order in the budget process. It has been far too long since we've been operating on that basis. Anyone who's run a company or any organization understands the value of process in doing that. We need to get back to regular order. We need to reform our entitlements. I'm sure we'll get into that later tonight. And finally, we need to end big government giveaways in the form of these big aggregate spending bills and student loan forgiveness. All of these are immoral and wrong.
Mr. Peay.
As a lifelong resident of As a lifelong resident as one born and raised in the Wasatch Front, I learned the value of $1 a long time ago. My parents taught me to be judicious with how I spent and work hard for every penny I earned. When we talk about the debt that Congress sees, it's because the men and women who make up Congress today don't feel that. They don't feel the needs of the average American or the average Utahn or the average member of the 3rd Congressional District. We need people who go to Congress and stand tough, who will drive us back to transparency and openness about the budgeting process. The last time we had a balanced budget, Congress was made up of approximately 70% veterans. These men and women had a shared experience and a shared set of values that allowed them to work together to make our government work. Today, we're down to 18% veterans in Congress. As a result, we have a chaos caucus. They have no shared relationships, no shared values, no shared experiences. Those are the types of people we need in Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Byrd.
Yeah, did you know that our children will inherit $266,000 each in debt? That's immoral and that's wrong. Being a business owner and also being a mayor of my hometown, I've balanced a government budget and I've balanced a business budget, and I will work to balance the federal budget. You know, there's a couple of ideas that I've had. First of all, we need single subject legislation. This is something that 41 out of the 50 states participate in. This is something that we need at the federal level. The other thing that I think, not that I think, but that I will push when I get into Congress is a legislation that will tie the hands of Congress and not allow them to work on anything else unrelated to the budget until the budget is passed. It's our #1 fiduciary responsibility, and it's something that we need to take serious. Thank you.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question, a rapid-fire follow-up question. Mr. Dougall, what's one thing you would cut to balance the budget?
Department of Ed.
Mr. Kennedy.
Medicare and Medicaid are rife with waste.
Mr. Lawrence.
Unproven green climate schemes.
Mr. Peay.
I would cut transportation and send it back to the states.
Mr. Byrd.
In studying the budget, I found that they've added $500 billion, close to that, in mandatory welfare spending, and that's what I would cut.
Thank you. Thank you all. The first question, this question goes to Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, you're in the field of medicine, you're a family physician, so let's talk about abortion. With the Dobbs case, the U.S. Supreme Court returned the regulation of abortion to the states. However, we have seen recent debate that there should be federal legislation on this issue. Would you support legislation that would allow abortion up to 15 weeks? Why or why not?
I have 8 children. I have 9 grandchildren. The 9th is actually going to be born in the next few weeks. I take care of children in my professional life. I've been doing that for 25 years now. I was second of 7 children and took care of my brothers and sisters growing up. I'm a pro-life person. I'm a pro-life professional. I'm a pro-life legislator. I've got a 100% pro-life record as I've worked through the state legislature, and I believe Utah does it right. The reality is we should support women in making the choice to keep those babies. And if they don't feel like they can keep those babies, then we need to provide them support that they can put those children up for adoption. In this case, the laboratories of democracy are the right place for this to happen. For the past 50 years, we've lived under Roe v. Wade. And with the Dobbs decision, states have a chance to innovate. And I'll admit, some states are doing this terribly wrong. Utah does it right. We allow abortion with rare exceptions, but I'm a pro-life legislator and will do everything in the federal legislature to promote life.
Mr. Lawrence.
I am strongly and unequivocally pro-life. I was grateful for the Dobbs decision in June of 2022 that overturned Roe v. Wade after 50 years of having this decision at the federal level. And yes, the Dobbs decision moved that authority, that abortion restriction authority, back to the states. But more importantly, it took it out of the hands of the judiciary and unelected judges and gave it back to the representatives of the people, including Congress. Look, I support letting this play out at the state level for now, but we have to be aware of what's happening in our country, namely California, Illinois, New York, even Oregon. Extreme abortion states are marketing and encouraging abortion tourism throughout our country, recruiting, literally, women and young minors to go to their state for any kind of abortion at any stage of pregnancy. If that continues, we need to strongly consider a federal ban. I think a 15-week ban is supported by most Americans, and I could certainly support that.
Thank you. Mr. Peay.
Yes, I am strongly pro-life. Like Dr. Kennedy mentioned, I am one who believes that abortion should only be allowed in very rare exceptions. Those exceptions are life of the mother. and in cases of rape and incest. I would note that I do not believe this is something that should ever be given to the federal government, because if we can legislate it away in the federal government one day, the next year the federal government can legislate it back. Abortion, and like so many other things, should be the bailiwick of the states. We cannot allow the federal government to run our lives. Supporting federal bans of abortion would be nothing more than growing the federal footprint in our state. That is something that we all know is not something we want. We all deal with federal regulations on our public lands and other federal regulations in our businesses. We can't allow this to start with our private lives and things like abortion. So I would not support a federal ban on abortion.
Thank you. Mr. Byrd.
Well, I'm proudly pro-life. And, you know, when it comes to abortion, this is a very delicate issue. I do not support abortion being a form of contraception. I do realize that there are certain situations where in the life of the mother and rape and incest and those extraneous circumstances that may be allowed. And I feel for those women that find themselves in those circumstances. I'm so grateful that we have Pro-Life Utah and Susan B. Anthony and other organizations that do a really good job to support those women making that choice and helping them through that situation. I'm grateful that Roe versus Wade was overturned and that decision went back to the states. I feel like Utah does a great job with the abortion issue, and I think at this moment in time it needs to be left with the states. Thank you.
Great. The final response on this question goes to you, Mr. Dougall.
Thank you. I'm staunchly pro-life. And no, I do not believe there should be a federal ban on abortion. Our federal government is one of limited powers, with everything else left to the state and the people. We've spent 50 years as a Republican Party making the case that this is a state issue. And now the Supreme Court rightly returned it back to the states and to the people. I think those that are continuing to push it at the federal level will ultimately end up with a California-style pro-abortion plan and policies. We should fight that, and we should keep it at the state level.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, this question goes to you. You're a CEO, and on your website tout that you're a problem solver because of your business experience. So let's solve the problem. Housing affordability is the #1 issue for likely voters in Utah, according to a recent survey by Sutherland Institute. The median price has increased from $305,000 to $535,000 since 2018. Did government at any level contribute to this problem? And the second part of that question is, should the U.S. federal government prioritize funding for affordable housing initiatives over infrastructure projects and other things they're funding to solve the affordable housing crisis?
The answer is yes. Government did affect and help cause this problem, and I'll explain why. First and foremost is inflation that has been given to us by the Biden administration. Look, when you look at the cost of a house, no single product has been more affected by inflation than a house. Concrete, rebar, drywall, lumber, all of them have seen even double-digit increases in cost over the last 4 years. Nothing has affected the affordability of housing in Utah or in this country in the last few years than inflation. Secondly, because the Biden administration was flat-footed on inflation, all the precursors, all the warnings, all the signs were there, but instead of acting, they told us it was transitory and kicked the can down the road. The result was the worst inflation in 50 years and rapid escalation of interest rates. Nothing has afforded the ongoing affordability of housing and the financing of housing more than high interest rates. Those two issues, if we could move interest rates back down and predictable and move back inflation, nothing would affect housing more.
Mr. Peay.
Yes, so in Utah we have a unique housing problem, especially along the Wasatch Front. We're literally running out of land. Obviously, when there's less supply, prices go up. So there's things, and while Mr. Lawrence may be correct that nationally we've had housing prices have gone up, they've gone up much faster in Utah, and we are facing some special problems. As one who has a daughter who's not far from looking for a permanent house, this is a key issue to me. There are a few things I think the federal government can do. Number one, I think we can get government back from get land back from the federal government that we could use to put land back on the market for development and for more homes. It would put more supply, which would drive prices down. Secondly, you asked the question, should the federal government put more money into affordable housing? I think if we go down that path, we're going to go down the same path we've seen with student loans, where the government gives money away, this puts more money into the market, which just drives prices up. And again, it expands the federal government. That's not something we should be doing.
Same question, Mr. Byrd.
yes, the government has negatively impacted inflation with home prices, and no, it is not the answer to this, and not the solution to this problem. You know, we talk about, I'm in the energy business, I'm also in the supply business, and this is a supply issue, and Case Lawrence did allude to this, and that is that, you know, you look at lumber. I went to San Juan County. They used to have a lumber, economy down there that has been regulated to where they've had to shut down. And this is part of the problem, where we over-regulate industry and it causes shortages, and then those shortages cause high prices. And it's from the lumber and the wire and the shingles and everything that goes into it, labor that goes into building a home, that is really driving up those costs. We need to get government out of the way. We need to deregulate a lot of those industries, and we need to let the free market and the economy do its thing.
Mr. Dougall.
Yes, the federal government drove part of this problem, and no, we shouldn't have the federal government injecting itself more in this. First of all, we have easy money drove the housing crash. Inflation is driving up costs and also driving up mortgage interest rates, which makes it more unaffordable to own a home. We've got a broken immigration system, which is impairing labor supply. Construction workers are hard to find. And there are opportunities for folks that want to live and pursue the American dream in a legal immigration system that would help. And trade wars with various countries are also driving up the cost of housing. But no, injecting more money into the market is not going to solve the problem. In fact, it's going to make the problem even worse. It's going to drive up the costs, and it's going to expand the federal government, which already can't afford the programs that it's spending on.
Final answer, Mr. Kennedy.
Ronald Reagan is famously quoted as saying, "The most scary words anybody that needs help can hear, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And I entirely agree with that. In fact, if we have the federal government involved, it's only going to make things worse. How do we know that? Part of the reason why we have a problem in the housing market is the fact that we have out-of-control spending that's driving inflation, costing us all more as we buy any product, including houses. So how do we work on that? Rein in out-of-control spending, which I'm deeply focused on. I think that's a vital component of what we should be doing in the federal legislature. In addition to that, we have onerous tariffs on the fundamental materials associated with building, including lumber. And we need to reduce those tariffs so that people can actually buy homes. And we, on the state level, this is where most of these problems can and should be solved. As a state senator, we have been working, myself and others have been working on this problem, and we've done that with a first-time home buyer loan program that allows people to have an opportunity to buy a house. Finally, Senator Mike Lee is sponsoring the Houses Act, which actually could buy contiguous federal lands and allow houses to be built on them. I'm entirely supportive of that legislation.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up question. Mr. Lawrence, what's one thing specifically you can do if elected to Congress to help solve the affordable housing crisis? What's going to be your focus, something that you can effectuate?
Be a budget hawk and cut reckless spending.
Mr. Peay.
Reform immigration so we can get a better labor force to build our housing market.
Mr. Byrd.
Deregulate and get government out of the way.
Mr. Dougall.
Cut spending. Out-of-control spending is driving up inflation. It's driving up the cost of housing.
Mr. Kennedy.
The overwhelming regulations associated with building and living in a house, those need to go away.
This question will go to you, Mr. Peay. You served, I think, 12 years in the Army National Guard. Thank you for your service. Let's talk about Ukraine and Russia. Should the United States continue to provide military aid to Ukraine in its conflict with Russia, considering the potential risks of escalating tensions with Russia, the threat of Putin potentially invading a NATO country, and the broader implications of our relationships with China and Iran?
Yes. The answer is yes. And the reason is, if we don't stand with Ukraine, if we don't provide them the weapons and ammunition that they need, then then the parade of horribles you just mentioned comes true. Right now in the world, we see a evil bloc, if you will, of Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia coalescing against America and its interests. The Ukrainians are on the front lines of that. They're being invaded by Russia. We should supply them those weapons and those ammunitions and the ammunition they need to hold the line. They've proven for the last 2 years that they can do that. And when the one time they failed or the one time they struggled was when we failed to support them. Furthermore, if we don't do that, the Chinese and the Iranians will see the weakness that in America, and they will take advantage of it. Places like Taiwan and the Middle East will grow worse. Finally, when America is not proactive is when she suffers. Bill Clinton had a chance to get Osama bin Laden. He chose not to do it. As a result, we got 9/11 and 20 years of war.
Mr. Byrd.
This is a difficult situation, and I tell you, it pains me to see the death that's happening in Ukraine and even in Russia. We've been in a quagmire for 2 years. We've sent hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine for funding, and we're not moving the needle. In my research, I found several things that we could be doing that we're not doing in this conflict. First of all, we had a President Biden, who put a pause on LNG exports to Europe in the middle of this conflict. If we're not selling gas to Europe, and then who will? And it's Russia, and so we're indirectly funding Russia. I found that through loose sanction, Russia's also laundering oil through India and Greece that is being sold as refined products back to the United States and Europe. The third thing, we're still buying 12% of our uranium to power our power plants from Russia. We need to put massive sanctions on Russia. There's so much more that we could be doing to end this conflict, and that's what we need to do before we continue with unfettered aid.
Same question, Mr. Dougall.
National defense is the key reason for the federal government. Pretty much everything else can be left to the states and to the people. So when it comes to Ukraine, absolutely, we need to support Ukraine. Speaker Johnson was absolutely correct. I'd rather send bullets than boys. I don't want boots on the ground. But I also want to avoid European countries exercising and invoking Article 5 of NATO, where we come to their mutual defense. We need to stop Russian aggression. But in addition to that, we need to strengthen our industrial complex. We need to be able to have the strength to face whatever threat is coming, whether it's Russia or China. China is a great emerging threat. We're overly dependent on China. We're in a trade war with them, and yet we're not well prepared if we end up in a hot war with China. And so we need to step back and we need to refocus on what we're trying to do to make sure that our government provides national security. Because once again, spending is undercutting our military.
Same question, Mr. Kennedy.
A few years ago, Joe Biden, in a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, sent a message to every dictator on the planet that it was time to move because the United States president was asleep at the switch. That's part of our problem. We have international wars because we have a president who's incapable of understanding the nature of what he does or doesn't do. So when it comes to the freedom fighters throughout the world, I'm deeply supportive of all of them. God bless them in their efforts. The United States of America is a freedom-loving country. But we cannot be the police officer of the whole world. We don't have the money to do all of this. Our grandchildren don't deserve us to rack up more national debt to support international wars that are not directly in our national security interests. When Ukraine needs help, we want to provide it, but you need to pay for it. And in that case, if they can't pay for it, we should seize Russian assets and make Russia pay for the mess that they've created for us. And I'll add to that, when it comes to Israel, I stand firmly with supporting Israel as well and selling them and Ukraine bombs, bullets, tanks, and medicines so they can prosecute their wars and survive.
And finally, Mr. Lawrence.
Our world is on fire. And the reason it's on fire is that this president and his administration have projected weakness and uncertainty on the national stage. That weakness is provocative. It's provocative to troublemakers like Putin, and as well as to China and Iran and their proxies. We need to counter that. We need strength and deterrence on the world stage, a strong American presence. Part of that formula for a strong American presence is supporting our allies abroad. Look, when we talk about Ukraine, we talk a lot about the cost, and we skip over talking about the cause. Their cause is just. They are freedom fighters protecting their homeland. I have been inspired by their courage and their resilience in the war against Russia. I don't believe in foreign aid. I believe in foreign investment in American interests. Future aid to Ukraine will be based on facts on the ground and how those affect American interests.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question. Mr. Peay, the most recent funding to Ukraine bill was opposed by Representatives Malloy and Burgess-Owens, and it was supported by Representative Curtis and Moore. How would you have voted?
I would have voted yes.
Mr. Byrd?
I would have voted no.
Mr. Dougall?
I would have voted no.
Mr. Kennedy?
I haven't read the bills completely, so I'll have to reserve that until I read the bill entirely.
Do I need to ask a follow-up?
You certainly may.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Thank you. One last question. If a NATO country is invaded by Putin, does it change your stance on the answer that you just gave? Mr. Lawrence? Or, I'm sorry, Mr. Peay.
No, and I think we have to have a right to be able to explain why. If Absolutely no. Absolutely, it doesn't change my stance. Ronald Reagan was asked the same question in 1964. He was asked, should we support those who are taking on the Soviets at the time? And he said yes. He said the price of freedom has always been worth paying. He said that we have to make this choice and we have to move forward accordingly. America has not changed so much in 60 years that we're ready to turn our back on the cause of freedom. 3 times in my life, I've been on the frontier of freedom. When you're there, you see it, you appreciate it, and you fight for it.
30 seconds to you, Mr. Byrd.
Thank you. I would say it depends on the circumstances, but NATO, they are our allies, and we need to support our allies. My answer would most likely be different. I would say yes. The reason I said no on the Ukraine is because of the reasons I gave before. I cannot stand to see us funding this Ukraine and Russian war on both sides. We've got to do things different. We've got to use everything, every resource at our disposal, save sending our men and women there to fight, and we're not doing that.
Same time, Mr. Dougall, 30 seconds.
No, it doesn't change my answer. In fact, I mentioned NATO's Article 5 in my original comments. It's critical. The key purpose of the federal government is national defense. Whatever that takes to defend our nation, that's what our federal government should be doing. And it should be prioritizing its spending accordingly, and it should be getting taxes lower, and it should be deregulating to make sure we have a strong industrial base, to make sure we can face whatever threat is facing our nation.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
I'm a big fan of Teddy Roosevelt's statement, speak softly and carry a big stick. When it comes to the United States of America, we should have strength and project that strength throughout the world. That would deter many of these conflicts that we have. But when it comes to our NATO allies, we've agreed to support them. But that does not mean we send our young men and young women into conflict to give their lives for a foreign conflict that does not directly implicate our national security interest. Europe should step up and perform in this way, and we can support our NATO allies without the blood of our young men and young women.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes. Projecting strength on the national stage, like I said, it's about standing with our allies. It's also about honoring our treaties, including Article 5 of NATO, which would require us as a good partner and ally to indeed enter that skirmish. That's why it's so important for us to be wise about the funding, support, military training, and aid that we give Ukraine now so that we can avoid and deter those possibilities later.
Great, thank you. This question, the final question of the first round, will go to you, Mr. Byrd. After this, we're going to ask a question from social media to prove that we are listening at the Utah Debate Commission and we want social media interaction on the hashtag UTDebates. So that'll come up in just a second. Mr. Byrd, you come from an energy part of our state. You had a career in the energy sector. So let's talk energy. Utah coal production dropped to its lowest level in 45 years in 2023, stemming from the closure of 2 mines. With solar-only production, 12% of Utah's overall electricity, how will we generate energy in Utah? And second, this week, Wyoming officials broke ground on a new nuclear power plant right on the Utah border. Would you support a nuclear power plant in Utah? And if so, are you comfortable storing the waste here?
I'll answer the second question first. And that is, yes, I'm comfortable with having a nuclear power plant here in Utah. Look, we have one of the largest uranium deposits in the state and in the nation here in District 3. And we need to utilize that. We have mines, we have the ability to be self-sustaining and provide power. Again, I mentioned before, we're buying most of our uranium 90+% from other countries, 12% from Russia. We need to change that and start supporting our own economies. As far as coal mining and coal burning power plants, they have come so far to clean up the particulates going into the air, NOx and SOx and all of these things. They're doing a really good job. We need to support that industry. That is our base load power. You know, the renewable industry is great, but the problem is we need, when that is available, it's usually during the day. And our peak times is during the night and in the mornings when we need this baseload power, and we need to support those industries that support our baseload power for our grid.
Mr. Dougall.
Absolutely. Americans demand reliable, affordable energy. And that's what we should be providing. We need a free market with all of the above energy solutions, whether that's green solutions like you mentioned, or traditional sources that are reliable. I also support nuclear, the traditional form as well as the new form coming out of Wyoming. And yes, I'd be comfortable storing whatever waste, because at the end of the day, as was mentioned earlier, one of the other key things is energy dominance is good for global security. So we shouldn't just be providing energy locally to our own communities. We should be supplying the world with that energy, making sure that they're not dependent on Russia or China.
Mr. Kennedy.
American exceptionalism, as with most things, is the answer to this question. The reality for us in the United States of America, and particularly with our good people in Utah, is we know how to use these resources, coal, oil, natural gas, and nuclear, in a safe and effective way that actually keeps our environment clean. There's nobody in this room within the sound of my voice that wants dirty air and dirty water. And so we need to turn this over to the good people of Utah and the good people of the United States so we can be dominant in our independence with energy. And when it comes to that, Yucca Mountain has generationally been a repository for nuclear waste. I am a big fan of nuclear. We do have uranium stores. We also have waste products that we can put in Yucca Mountain. And finally, we have vast tracts of federal land. We could build many power plants all around Yucca Mountain and dispatch that energy all over the country in a clean and effective fashion so we can be energy dominant and independent.
Same question, Mr. Lawrence.
I believe in an all-of-the-above energy policy that would include clean nuclear energy and certainly also includes coal energy. Just a week and a half ago, I was down and toured the Huntington coal power plant. It is run responsibly, efficiently, and it is a valuable asset to our state that we should keep in action and keep in operation. Look, the 3rd District of Utah is a microcosm of our country, and there is no greater correlation between a booming American economy than a booming energy sector. We need to unleash our energy sector. That includes the frontier, which is rare earth minerals, of which Utah has rich resources, and we need to lead out in producing and developing and accessing those rare earth minerals for our new economy. The other thing I have to mention, I trust and believe in American innovation and American entrepreneurs to continue to add to this discussion with innovation and technologies that are going to increase our energy independence.
Mr. Peay.
Yes, as a lifelong resident of the 3rd Congressional District, I remember when an Intermountain Power Plant was open. It was a big deal. It brought jobs to Utah, it brought jobs to Delta, Utah, and it brought mining jobs to Carbon County and Emery County. It was a great moment for this state. Today, California and other states continue to push back against coal energy. Utah should continue to develop those assets as well as every other type of energy we have. Speaking of Intermountain Power, right now they are installing a hydrogen-based generator down there that uses incredible technology that is clean, inexpensive, and very powerful. Nuclear energy is something that I believe something we should have and need to have. Not only does it provide, and not only if we build a nuclear plant in this district would it be near Denver, the Wasatch Front, and Las Vegas, but it would also provide jobs in southeastern Utah where they mine and mill uranium.
Thank you, Mr. Peay. I'm going to ask a quick follow-up question, and then as promised, Britton Grosbeck has added a question on Facebook that we're going to get to. But let me ask a follow-up on energy. Some members of Utah's congressional delegation have joined the Conservative Climate Caucus. If you're elected, will you join that caucus, Mr. Byrd?
And I've mentioned this before, the Conservative Climate Caucus, just because it has climate in the name does not mean that we're pandering to the climate religion or climate extremist. This is a platform that we can utilize to tell the truth about energy. I want to create a comprehensive energy plan with my experience in energy, and I want to build collaboration around that. We have an energy plan for the state. My good friend Dusty Monks is part of the governor's office of energy, and I want to make sure that that is heard on a national level and that that is a good platform to be able to have that discussion.
30 seconds, Mr. Dougall.
Absolutely. We shouldn't leave this topic to the Democrats to control. I think with our free market approaches, we have a much better way to address not only environmental concerns, but having better energy policy for Americans. But in addition, I will partner with anybody when it comes to balancing the budget, reining in reckless spending, and bringing accountability to the federal government.
Mr. Kennedy.
As a state senator, I've learned over many years that if you're not at the table, you will be on the menu. And the reality behind this is that The climate change caucus process has been running amok, pushing us into energy dependence rather than energy independence. And I believe Representative Curtis has done a good job bringing us into an opportunity to actually be at the table instead of on the menu. And so I've already agreed to be part of the Conservative Climate Caucus, and we need to unleash energy dominance and also work on clean air and water, which we can do in Utah and in the United States of America.
Same question, Mr. Lawrence.
Yes, Republicans should be leading on this issue, and I'm grateful for the leadership of John Curtis and others who have earned and established a seat at the table in this discussion. Look, we have to get into this discussion because if we allow extreme climate theory to continue unbridled, it has the potential to absolutely ruin our fiscal house. Extreme environmentalists would spend every last dollar in our treasury if they are allowed to. We have to stop that. We need a voice at the table. We need to counter them because none of these proposals, none of these policies are proven to have any impact. We need to hold the line.
Mr. Peay.
Yes, I would join. It's the classic example of what I've touted throughout this campaign of being civil, pragmatic, and a bipartisan approach to solving problems and moving to the future. This is a way to defend our energy industry here in Utah. It's a way to energy dominance throughout the world. We have to understand how this game works. We have to be ready to play with it, play in it. Congressman Curtis's leadership on this issue has been unmatched and is certainly an example I would follow.
Thank you all. Mr. Dougall, here's the social media question. Comes to you. All candidates want to adjust the federal budget. If elected, how would you address the Pentagon's failed consecutive audits? That comes from Britton Grosbeck. Thank you, Britton, for your question.
Thank you for your interest in audits. It's outrageous that the Department of Defense has been unable to pass an audit since they were required to do this in the 90s. What this requires is holding folks' feet to the fire. It is difficult to pass an audit, especially when you're as large as the Department of Defense. But what that means is you've got to hold them accountable and you've got to push them harder to make sure they're bringing accountability to where the dollars go and they're accounting for how that money is being spent. And you break down the Department of Defense agency by agency, entity by entity, but you've got to hold their feet to the fire because for too long, Congress has allowed them to skate without passing that audit. They didn't even have to try and do the audit, and then when they started doing it, they've been failing. So the key thing is budgeting and oversight, and you've got to provide that oversight to the Department of Defense. You can't just wash your hands and say, we like defense, let them do whatever. You've got to hold their feet to the fire.
Mr. Kennedy.
I have 8 children. I know what shenanigans look like, and I know how to deal with those. We've been dealing with that in our family for many years. When it comes to the reality behind responsible budgeting and fulfilling the obligation that the Pentagon in this case has to the American public, is if they're going to misbehave, there will be a punishment. What is that punishment? Where did they fail on their audits? So anytime I have a student, or in this case my children, that are not behaving properly and they want ice cream for dinner every night, the answer is no. And if you're not going to comply, then we're going to find a way to punish you. And in this case, if the Pentagon can't comply with the requirements of Congress, then they're going to start to see their funding and their monetary allocations decline over and over again. We're going to do investigations. We're going to publish this in the media. We're going to show the American taxpayers what is happening with these people and how irresponsible they are with this. And once that public shaming, once the financial punishment drops into these people's laps, at some point they're going to start to comply. And I'm the kind of person that knows how to work that process. I've been doing it for many years.
Mr. Lawrence.
Look, faith in institutions of government by the American people is at an all-time low, and it should be. As representatives, we need to hold our government institutions accountable in order to increase that faith. We've already mentioned today, we have tough decisions to make in our country about military spending, about defending our country and projecting strength on the world stage. It's impossible to sell the American people on tough choices when our own Defense Department can't pass basic audits. That's shameful and it's embarrassing. I've run organizations. I know how to keep people accountable. I will insist on it as your representative.
Mr. Peay.
So I don't think anybody up here has ever dealt with a soldier before. The men and women that work in the Pentagon, they're not really worried about how much they make. They're not really, probably not as worried about those audits as they should be. The reality is they took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, and they've signed a check that says that If push comes to shove, they'll put their lives on the line and die for this country. If you want the Department of Defense to comply with audits, you're going to have to lead from Congress. You're going to have to show that you trust them, and you're going to have to give definitive goals about how they're supposed to spend their money and why they should spend their money. And then you call the generals and the admirals in and you ask the tough questions. We live in a dangerous world. If we're really going to start punishing the Department of Defense at this moment and start cutting their funding when there are threats in Eastern Europe, there are threats in the Middle East, there are threats in Asia, it shows a view of America that is inconsistent with the Republican Party that I've been a member of my entire life.
Finally, Mr. Byrd.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen as I've traveled throughout the district is the mistrust that people have in the federal government and in government in general. How we solve that, we start first with transparency. Transparency leads to accountability. Transparency and accountability lead to rebuild trust. Audits show transparency. You know, as the mayor of Roosevelt, we have an audit every single year. We have to account for where the taxpayers' money is being spent and how it's spent, so that there is an accounting from the government to the taxpayer of where their money is going. That needs to absolutely happen at the federal level, and it needs to be completely transparent. In my personal opinion, I can't believe that we don't do this on the federal level, that we haven't passed an audit in our defense spending or the Pentagon or any other branch of government. This absolutely has to happen. This is our responsibility as representatives to the people, and we need to make it happen.
Let's move on to a student question. A student at SUU has a question about rural and urban Utah. And this will go to you, Mr. Kennedy.
Hello, my name is Tyden. I'm a political science student at Southern Utah University. And here's my question. The most pressing issues in urban Utah tend to be different than those of rural Utah. How do you plan to effectively lead both rural and urban areas of the state while balancing their separate and sometimes conflicting needs?
I've been in public service for a long time, and it's been my pleasure to be a state senator and work on rural and urban issues. And the way to do that is to build consensus, to come to understand what the issues are. And it's been my privilege to go all over this state, and also particularly for this race, all over Congressional District 3, and come to know the issues that the people confront. And I really enjoy the sit-down visits in people's living rooms, the sit-down visits in the local restaurant, to talk about what those challenges are, whether it's rural or urban areas. And as somebody who's been in public service and had the opportunity to try to build those coalitions, recognizing that there are competing interests, I have a great deal of affection for all of the people in this district. In fact, the state of Utah, these are great people. It's the greatest asset we have in this state is the people. Our lands are beautiful and full of resources, but the people are the greatest resource. As your congressman, I will always listen and work to understand and work on all of the issues that we confront.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes, I mentioned earlier that the 3rd District of Utah is a microcosm of our country, and that is true in every respect. Look, as I've traveled this district, I visited all of the counties in this district, and I can tell you that the big issues, the important issues, actually cross both rural and urban. They're economic issues. They have economic issues, jobs, building our economy. You look at rural Utah, especially in the 3rd District, some of the most sophisticated economic issues are in rural Utah, including our oil and gas industry in the Uinta Basin, our energy and coal industry in Carbon and Emery counties. And those issues are sophisticated, they're difficult, but they have to do with driving the economy and creating jobs. That's the same thing people on the Wasatch Front are interested in. So I think when you boil it down, the most important issues are very similar. We can agree and come together to work on those issues. I understand the economy. I know that's the most important thing to focus on in this role, is building the economy in Utah and in our country, and that's what I will focus on.
Mr. Peay.
Yes, as a resident of the 3rd Congressional District, and one who's lived here his whole life and played baseball and traveled throughout this district his entire life, I know that the needs in the rural part of this district are different. NEPA and FLIPMA and the way we can use our federal lands impact the people who live their lives every day. Whether it's from this ridiculous conservation rule that was recently passed down, whether it's the way that federal agencies regulate land and ignore our local resource plans. These are issues that we need to, that whoever wins this seat, and hopefully it's me, has to have the courage to reform those things so that projects in rural Utah that lead to more energy, more infrastructure, can move through the approval process without unnecessary litigation, and we can get better jobs out there, and we can help that part of the state grow like the Wasatch Front has grown for the last 40 years.
Same question, Mr. Byrd.
Yeah, I think my colleagues here have done a really good job in setting this up for me. I am the only rural candidate in this race. And as such, these complex and diverse issues are exactly that. And we need somebody. We have an opportunity for the first time in almost 100 years to have somebody from rural Utah represent rural Utah at the federal level in Washington, dealing with public lands and energy and water and tribal issues and those types of things that I know, that I understand, that I have a strength and a forte in. But look, I'm the type of person, I've been the most involved mayor, is what I've been told in Roosevelt. I'll be the most involved congressman in this district. You know, it's interesting to see the issues that we face on the Wasatch Front in comparison to rural Utah really tie. We have congestion and housing problems here. We do not have economic problems in the Wasatch Front, but it's just the opposite in rural Utah. And we really need to start looking at those issues and tying those together. And I'm willing to do that and excited to do that as your next congressman.
Mr. Dougall.
Once again, this comes back to the critical issue. Our federal government has blown well past what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be one of limited powers, and yet it seems to invade every aspect of our life. When you get down to it, fundamentally, what the federal government should be doing is shared along urban and rural Utah. National defense is clearly a shared issue. But when you step back and you think about all the regulations that come into play, whether it's locking up public lands, these are issues that, unfortunately, lots of folks along the Wasatch Front, but especially across urban America, they do not understand. And that's one of the key things that I have to do as a congressman, is to help my colleagues understand how the impacts in rural Utah to public lands impacts their constituents. So then they want to help us unlock those lands. I have to help them understand why NEPA, environmental regulations, have been weaponized against infrastructure development that is so critical, both in urban and rural Utah.
Thank you, Mr. Dougall. Final question, we're going to do a rapid fire, and then we'll head toward our closing statements. Should members of Congress be required to publicly state the names of companies they have investments in? Mr. Lawrence, yes or no?
Certainly. Members of Congress, I've mentioned earlier that faith in our institutions is at an all-time low. It should be the least we can do as Congresspeople to require transparency about finances, both our own investments, our own stock trading, but also those who contribute and donate to our campaigns. That's a small sacrifice to pay in order to encourage and further enhance people's trust in Congress, which is at an all-time low.
Mr. Peay, 10 seconds, yes or no?
Yes, transparency is key. If you want people to believe in you, they have to know who you are, where you live, where you grew up, who you want to be.
Mr. Byrd.
Absolutely. I've said this earlier on, transparency leads to accountability. Accountability and transparency lead to trust. We need to gain the trust of the American people. We're an open book. We're in a fishbowl. We're putting ourselves in this position. Absolutely.
Mr. Dougall.
Absolutely. Our institutions are crumbling. Americans are losing trust. They need to know what companies you've invested in, and really we need to restrict that investment.
Mr. Kennedy.
Absolute transparency. I'm entirely supportive of that. My life has been very transparent. There's no skeletons in this closet. As a doctor, I've got one in my office. It's a plastic one. It's not a real one. But I have nothing to hide, and I'd fully support this concept of full transparency financial transactions.
We've now reached the end of the debate. A random drawing held earlier determined that the first closing statement go to candidate Stewart Peay. And now, Mr. Peay, your closing statement.
As a lifelong resident of the 3rd Congressional District, some of you know me from our days at Springville High, and some of you crossed paths with me while I was the county party chair in Utah County. Others of you know me as the coach of your son's baseball team, while others of you know me as the man who represented your business in the courts of this state. Finally, there's a group of you out there that I had the privilege to serve with in the Utah Army National Guard for 12 years. And there's a lucky bunch that have my wife as a teacher at a high school in our district. Now, you see, as one of my candidates who you'll hear from last, a Californian who doesn't even live in the district, I'm much different than that because I was born and raised here in the state of Utah. And as a result of that, I have deep connections not only to this district, but to many of you watching. And as Governor Cox said, while I wouldn't go as far as Governor Cox went last night in building a wall to keep Californians out, I wouldn't send one to Washington, D.C. to represent you. The 3rd Congressional District is the best district in the state. We deserve to have one of our own represent us. That's why Senator Romney and Congressman Stewart have endorsed me and why I asked for your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Byrd.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Thomas, for hosting this and also the Debate Commission. Again, I was born and raised also in the Uinta Basin. I've been married for 23 years to my beautiful wife who is here tonight in the audience. We have 4 children, 1 grandchild that was born about a month ago. And, you know, I'm doing this for him, and I'm doing this for my family, and I'm doing this for you and your family. I grew up in the Reagan era, when America was the shining city on the hill, when Americans could be proud to be Americans, where we had freedoms and opportunities and hope, and I want to restore that hope. I want to make sure that we have transparency, accountability, and restore the trust in the federal government. I want to make sure that people understand, coming from rural Utah, I have a in-depth understanding of public lands, of the issues that we face at the federal level that affect our district. I'm ready to serve you, happy to serve you. I'm J.R. Byrd, and I ask for your vote.
Mr. Dougall.
America is a grand experiment, founded on the idea that we're all free to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Unfortunately, almost 250 years later, our federal government is racing out of control. Dysfunction, crushing debt, and a disdain for the rule of law. Political violence is unacceptable, and we all remember what took place on January 6th. We should never forget the horror that we witnessed, and we should never excuse that bad behavior. Will that grand experiment fail under our watch? I believe America needs more than an agenda of vengeance and retribution. We're too great a nation to settle for that. We used to be the party of big ideas. Sadly, not today. But today we need big ideas more than ever before to restore America to that beacon of hope and opportunity for the future. I'm John Dougall, Frugal Dougall. I ask for your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
I'm so grateful to be the father of 8 children, and my 9th grandbaby is going to be born in the next few weeks, and I'm totally excited about that. The United States of America is at a critical juncture, and I want to make sure that the United States is what it should be, the greatest nation in the history of the world, and I want to fight to preserve and protect that. The reality for me is over my years, I've learned a lot of things. As a doctor, I'm a trained listener and healer. As an attorney, I'm a trained advocate for justice. As a small business owner, I know how difficult it is to make payroll under onerous government regulations and taxation. And finally, as a state senator, it's been my privilege to demonstrate that working together, we can solve any problem. If you hire me for this job, and I'd be honored to have your support, I don't need training wheels for 18 months to get me going. I've actually done the responsible and important work that we would expect in Utah. I've passed complex legislation under civil and thoughtful constraints and worked with people to make things happen. I'm Mike Kennedy, and I'd be honored to have your support.
Mr. Lawrence.
I don't believe politics should be a career. I don't think that's what our founding fathers intended. I think instead they envisioned us going out, gaining experience, gaining wisdom, and then in due season coming back and giving back to our country through elected office. That is the spirit of my candidacy. I am a businessman who's been on the front lines of every economic crisis of our generation, including the Great Recession and the COVID shutdown. And through all of those, I've solved problems and come out standing up. I'm asking for you to send me and that experience back to Washington, D.C. And if you do, I will make you proud. I will represent the 3rd District on the national stage with honor and with skill. I'm asking for your vote and your support. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates, for participating tonight and for your dedication to public service. Election Day is Tuesday, June 25th. Contact your county clerk if you have any questions about making your vote count in this election. We greatly appreciate PBS Utah for donating the production facilities to broadcast this debate. We are also grateful for the Larry H. and Gail Miller Family Foundation, Zions Bank, the George S. and Dolores Dory Eccles Foundation, and the Stewart Family Foundation for their generous support of the Utah Debate Commission. This debate and others from previous years are available online at utahdebatecommission.org. I'm Thomas Wright. Thank you and good night.